Okay, we are on Daf Ayin Beis Amid Aleph. Just a quick review of what the last thing the Gemara had said. The Gemara in the previous Daf, it had a Mishnah, but we'll focus on the Mishnah in a minute. Rabbi comes into the Gemara and he says that Tumah Belua is not Matama. What does Tumah Belua not Matama mean? That means that if you swallow a Tameh object and then you Matahar yourself, the object that's Tameh, that's inside your stomach, does not affect the rest of the body. The opposite is also true. Tahara Belua Einu Matama. But let's focus on Tumah Belua Einu Matama. So the Gemara said, but wait a minute, isn't that Mefarsha Mishnah? What does Rabbi have to say this for? It's a Mefarsha Mishnah that if you swallow a Tameh ring, and then you go to the mikveh, the Tameh ring does not affect the rest of the body. So the Gemara said yesterday that Rabbi was being Mechadish, not if you swallow a Tameh ring that it's not Matama, or if you swallow a Tahar ring and then you become Tameh that the ring doesn't become Tameh. Those things are Mishnayos. What Rabbi was Mechadish is that there's no transmission of Tumah within the body, i.e., if you swallow both rings, you swallow a Tameh ring and a Tahar ring, and they're going down and they're in the stomach together, and the Tameh ring touches the Tahar ring in the belly, there's no transmission of Tumah within the stomach. That was the Chiddush of Rabba. So says the Gemara, Daf Ayin Beis Amid Aleph, ha'ober v'chaya, the shtei tabois, dami v'katamlo, ober l'chaya. The problem is, it's not the Mishnah. What did the Mishnah say? The Mishnah said that if you have a woman who loses a child, God forbid, and the baby is in the womb, and the chaya, the midwife, sticks her hand into the woman and touches the baby, the halacha is, the midwife is Tameh. Now that's an example of a transmission of Tumah that takes place inside the body. And yet it's Tameh. So how could Rabbi say that there's no transmission of Tumah within the body when it comes to the two rings? But the case of the midwife and the fetus, that's a transmission of Tumah that takes place within the body. And it does transmit Tumah. So Amar Rabbi responds, Shani Uber Hoyel B'Sefer Lotzis. Rabbi says there's a difference. The difference between the case of the rings and the case of the fetus is that the fetus is not going to stay in the body long term. It's eventually going to come out. So because it's going to come out, and it's going to come out whole, meaning it's not like, food which is digested and then comes out in pieces. Because the baby is going to leave the body intact, we look at it as if it's already outside the body. Meaning, Rabbi says, I'm right, that there's no transmission of Tumah within the body. So if two rings were to touch each other, there's no transmission of Tumah. But the fetus is different because the fetus is going to leave the body at some point. So because it's going to leave the body, it's as if it left the body right now. So says the Gemara, what, as opposed to rings? Well, rings are not going to leave the body. Are you going to stay inside the body forever? Says the Gemara. Amar Rava says to Rabba, Ober Seifer Lasis Tabas Ain Seifer Lasis. What the rings are not going to leave the body. Of course they're going to leave the body. So what's the difference? Why is it that by rings there's no transmission of Tumah, but by the fetus to the midwife there is? So let me say it outside, we'll see it inside. The Gemara is going to say the truth is there is no transmission of Tumah on a biblical level inside the body, at least according to many Tanaim. The case of the Mishnah that the midwife is Tameh is derabanan, because we're afraid that if there's no transmission of Tumah at all, even rabbinically, what's going to happen if the head of the baby comes out? Now, if the head of the baby comes out, it's already considered born. There's for sure a transmission of Tumah. L'kuli amal chal. And the midwife is going to touch the baby's head, not realizing that there's a distinction between inside the body and outside the body. And the midwife is not going to realize that the head already moved outside of the body. So therefore, Chazal had to make an Issa D'Rabbanan. Elama Rava says, Pumpadisa Yadi Taimai Milsa. The Pumpadisas know the explanation. Who's the Pumpadisas? Rav Yosef. Rav Yosef said, Rav Yosef, Rav Yehuda, Shmuel, Tumah zu einem Divrei Torah. This Tumah of the midwife and the fetus is Taka not deraisa. El Divrei Seifrim. It's Takonas Chazal. Now the Gemara just speaks it out. Why do you have to say it's Eina Divrei Torah, El Divrei Seifrim? Just say it's Divrei Seifrim. My Eina Divrei Torah, El Divrei Seifrim. So the Gemara says like this. The truth is, it's B'chlal Machlekes Tanoim whether a fetus is able to transmit Tumah at all. The point of Deloy Tema, Aliba de Rav Akiva Damar Ub Ma'ima Tameh. Elafila Rav Yishmael Damar Ub Ma'isha Tahar Gazu Barabanan Tumah. The truth is, it's a Machlekes Tanoim B'chlal whether it's Shayach Tumah on a biblical level inside. So the point of Rava is as follows. According to Rav Akiva, it's Tameh Deraisa. But even Rabbi Yishmael, who feels that there's no transmission of Tumah on a biblical level, he would still admit that there's a rabbinic Tumah. In other words, as I'll explain in a moment why. In other words, when it comes to the rings, it could be there is no Tumah. But when it comes to the baby, there's a Machlekes Tanoim. According to Rabbi Akiva, there's a Tumah Deraisa. According to Rabbi Yishmael, there's a Tumah Derabanan. Everyone agrees it's Tameh. So when the Mishnah says Tameh, that's L'chuli Alma. It's a Machlekes of whether it's Deraisa or Derabanan. But in other words, unlike the rings, Rav Yishmael agrees. I think Rav Akiva would say by the rings it's Tameh as well. But the point is, Rav Yishmael believes there's no transmission of Tumah inside the woman on a biblical level, but he acknowledges that there's a rabbinic tumah as opposed to the rings. Why is there rabbinic tumah? My taima. Chazal had to make it that you're tamei midrabanan. Why? Because they were afraid that the fetus's head might come outside of the birth canal, which would make it born on a biblical level, which would have a transmission of tumah l'kuli alma l'chol hadayos. And the midwife will not realize that there's a difference, or the midwife will not notice that the head is already out and touch the baby, and therefore if the midwife is comfortable touching the unborn fetus that's dead, then she might come to touch the fetus when the head's out, and therefore Chazal had to say there's a tumah d'Rabbanan. Now, the Mishnah had said that the fetus makes the midwife tameh, but it does not make the mother tameh until the mother births the child. Now, the question is, if Chazal were afraid and wanted to make an issa d'Rabbanan, a tumah d'Rabbanan, then why did they only make the tumah d'Rabbanan for the midwife and not for the mother? They should make it that the second she's pregnant, there's a tumah d'Rabbanan. Ihachi isha nami. The Gemara says, Isha margashav atzma. There's no concern by the mother. Why? What's the concern? The concern is that the midwife is going to touch the head after it left the body without realizing the head's out. The mother will definitely know the head's out because the mother will feel it. And therefore there's no concern of that happening. Meaning Chazal had to make it really at a biblical level, according to Rabbi Shmuel, there's no tumah inside the body. But Chazal had to make a tumah d'Rabbanan because they were afraid that what's going to happen is the head is going to come out, the midwife is not going to notice and touch the baby. And that's for sure tumah, and therefore they made a tumah d'Rabbanan in all situations. So says the Gemara, what about the mother? The mother, there's no concern because the mother will know if the head's out. Says the Gemara, but wait a minute, if the mother is able to tell, so why is there a tumah d'Rabbanan at all? Let the mother just tell the midwife, hey, the baby, the head's out. And the answer is very simple, trida, because during labor and all these situations, it's so chaotic, we're afraid that the mother will forget to tell the midwife. And therefore, by a midwife, there's taka concern, and therefore Chazal made an issa d'Rabbanan, a tumah d'Rabbanan. Now, we mentioned before, a machlekes tanoim, whether the baby transmits tumah on a biblical level, or is only d'Rabbanan. So the Gemara says, and it was machlekes Rabbi Shmuel and Rabbi Akiva. The Gemara over here is going to quote this machlekes. My Rabbi Shmuel, my Rabbi Akiva. What is the machlekes Rabbi Shmuel and Rabbi Akiva? So the Gemara says, the Gemara, D'Tanya, B'chol asher yigal pnei hasada. The pasuk describes touching a corpse, and it says that the corpse is pnei hasada, is out in the open. Lahaitzi uber b'mai isha, that excludes the case of a dead fetus in the mother's womb, that it will not transmit tumah by touch. Divrei Rabbi Shmuel. So Rabbi Shmuel would say that our Mishnah is only d'Rabbanan. Rav Akiva Omer says no. He says he holds that the fetus does transmit tumah. So what is the pasuk by Al Pnei Hasada doing? It's not to exclude a fetus, but it's l'rabbeis goyel v'doifik. It's to include the cover and wall of the coffin. So if you have a dead body in a coffin and you touch the cover of the coffin or the wall of the coffin, it's a biblical tumah. Even though if there's a case of, let's say, no oil, it's still tamei d'oraisa, and that's included from the pasuk Al Pnei Hasada, that if the coffin's out in the open, every part of the coffin transmits tumah. Ravi Shmuel, who uses Al Pnei Hasada lahaitzi uber, how does he know the cover and the wall of a coffin transmit tumah? He says it's halacha Moshe Messinai. Rav Akiva, what does he say about the fetus? So Rabbi Shmuel felt this pasuk is excluding the fetus from transmitting tumah. Rav Akiva, uber b'mai isha tameh. He disagrees and he believes that the dead fetus, is able to transmit tumah within the mother's womb. Midaraisa minole, how does Rav Akiva know this on a biblical level? Even though you could argue he just doesn't have an exclusion, but the Gemara feels that there's a source. Amar Rav Oishia, Amar Kra, Hanegeya b'meis b'nefesh. Now the simple pshat of the pasuk is b'meis b'nefesh is that you touch a corpse that has a soul. But what he says is meis b'nefesh. It's a dead body within a soul. In other words, it's a baby within the mother. Ezu meis sheb'nefesh aladam have oimes zeuber b'ma'isha. Rav Yishmael, who feels that there is no transmission of tum in such a situation, what does he do with this pasuk? He says b'meis b'nefesh is not referring to a womb or a fetus in a mother, but rather it's telling you that there's a different type of tumah, even if it's just the soul. What does it mean, just the soul? The soul is the blood. That if you just have no body, but you just have a revius of blood that comes from a corpse, that also transmits tumah, because that's benefesh, that's the nefesh. Ezu nefesh al adam shematama v'ezu revi'as dam. So Rav Akiva, how does he know that a revi'as dam is tameh? He uses the pasuk to tell you the fetus. Rav Akiva responds, the truth is he doesn't like this pasuk to say that you're metama for revi'as dam. Why? Because Rav Akiva holds you don't need a revi'as from one nefesh. You could have a revi'as from multiple bodies. So this pasuk cannot be referring to this. Rav Akiva tameh. Rav Akiva is l'shitasoi. Rav Akiva sheet is that even a revi'as of blood that comes from two corpses transmits tumah via oil. The Tanya, and therefore this pasuk can't be saying revi'as from one nefesh because that's singular. He holds if even from nefashos, so he uses the pasuk. He has a different source. The Tanya of Kiva Omer menayil revi'as dam haba mishnei meisim shematama ba'oil. How do I know that if you have a revi'as dam that comes from multiple dead bodies, but it's accumulative? Let's say revi'as is 3 ounces. You have 3 ounces coming from multiple corpses. That is matama ba'oil. Shnemer al kol nafshois meis lo yavei. Nafshois is plural. Shtei nafshois v'shir echad. Nafshois meis, plural and then singular. The answer is it's the shear of one mace, which is a revi'as, but it comes from multiple people. So the pasuk before of hanegeh b'meis b'nefesh cannot be referring to revi'as dam from one nefesh because he holds that it's metama even a revi'as dam from multiple nefashos. Okay, new Mishnah. Now this Mishnah we already had concepts of this in the previous. Beheima hamakasha leilid. You have an animal that's having a difficult time giving birth. V'hoitzi over his yadeh, and the fetus puts its hand out. V'chatcha, and you cut it. Now, when the fetus's hand is out, it's not included in the shechita. So you cut it. And you cut it while the animal's mother was alive. And then you shechted the mother. So the halacha is habasar tar. Now that severed hand is aver min hachai, because it was not included in the shechita. But it's not tameh. The reason why it's not metame is because... No, let me explain. The severed limb is Eva Menachai, so it actually is itself Tameh, but it doesn't transmit Tumah. The reason being is because before the animal's mother is shechted, it does not have a status of food. And it's not roy to give and to transmit and to mekabel Tumah until the shechita. So because it was severed before the shechita, it did not have a chance to transmit Tumah to the rest of the rest of itself and the rest of its body and the mother. But let's say the hand was out during the shechita. So you shechted and the hand is out. So the hand is not included in the shechita. So you can't eat the hand, and then you cut it. So that hand is Eva Menachai. And not only is it Eva Menachai, at the time of the shechita, when all the mother and the fetus is rendered food, and now roy l'kabel tumah, it was connected to this Eva Menachai. Now, Eva Menachai has the status of nevela. So, l'chora, that should make it that the hand is a nevela, which will transmit tumah to the rest of the body. So, says the Mishnah, habasar maga nevela. Yeah, the rest of the fetus has a status of touching nevela. The rest of the fetus is tameh. Why? The hand is Eva Menachai, and it has a status of nevela. And b'shah shchita was connected to the rest of the fetus. The rest of the fetus is mekabel tumah. Divrei Meir. The Chum disagree, and they say, no, maget treifa shchuta. They say like this. It is mekabel tumah. The rest of the fetus is tameh, but not nevela. It's tameh that it's able to be metame kodshim only, but it's not nevela. Why is it not nevela? They say because the mother shchita removes it. Now, the mother shchita is not able to allow you to eat the hand, but they feel that the mother shchita is effective enough that it removes the status of nevela from... it removes the status of nevela from the hand vis-a-vis that it can't transmit tumah. Now he feels that the Chachamim feel that the shchita of the mother is effective. Now you're going to say, well, how can the shchita of the mother? Right? Shchita always does two things. It is matar achila and it removes status of nevela for tumah. So Chachamim say that because the hand was connected at the time of the shchita does enough to remove the tumas nevela from the hand. Now it does not matter achila, but it's enough. Now where do you find that a shchita can do one without the other? So the answer is treifa. If you have an animal that's a treifa, and you shecht it, it's not a nevela, it removes the tumah. Even though that shchita is not going to be matar achila, the shchita does enough that it removes the tumah. So to the shchita of the mother, not only is it matar the rest of the fetus an achila, but it removes the tumah of the connected hand that's sticking out. Go to the next page, and he speaks it out. Now, the Chachamim defend themselves that you can have a shechita remove the tumah even though it's not matar achila. Mamatzina b'treifa, just like every treifa. Shechita mitaheres, that the shechita of a treifa is mitaheret, meaning if you shech the treifa, you're not going to be able to eat the treifa, but you won't have tumah. It removes the tumah. Haf shchita behema titaras ha'ever. So to the shchita of the mother removes the tumah of the limb, because it's comparable to a treifa, where both the shchita of the treifa is not matter achila but removes tumah. So to the shchita of the mother is not matter the achila of the hand but removes the tumah of the hand. Rabbi responds, "Lo, you can't compare the two. Imtihar the shchita treifa osa davar shagufa titaras ha'ever davar she'eino gufa." Rabbi responds, "I understand why the shchita of a treifa would remove the tumah of a treifa because you're doing shchita on the animal itself. But over here, you're shechting the mother. How could it remove tumah for the hand that's sticking out of the body? If it's out of the body, it's not included in the shchita. So you can compare it to treifa. By treifa, at least you're shechting the animal itself. Over here, you're shechting the mother, and you want the tumah of the hand that's sticking out of the mother to be removed. How could that happen?" Now, we said before, so he disagrees. He feels that the shechita of the mother will not affect the baby's hand at all because it's outside of the body. Now, the Rabbanan are comparing it to treifa. When you shech the treifa, it's not matar achila, but it removes tumah. How do you know this? So the Gemara says, "Behema tmeya asur b'achila, af treifa asur b'achila, ma behema tmeya in shchita samateres, af treifa l'teter shchita." The Gemara says, "You told me before that if you shech the treifa, the tumah is removed, even though the shchita is not matar achila. It does enough to remove the tumah." Wait, how do you know this? I would compare it to the opposite. I would say like this: if you shech the chazer, it doesn't remove the tumah, because the shchita is nothing. So to the treifa also you can't eat. Meaning, what's the difference between chazer and treifa? You have a cow that's a treifa, you can't eat it. You have a chazer, you can't eat it. If you shech the chazer, it does nothing. It doesn't remove the tumah sota. If you shech the treifa, it shouldn't do anything either. Lois, the Gemara says you can't compare the treifa to chazer. Why? Imam bebehema tmeya shleihay salah shasa kosher. You can't compare the two. A chazer was aser from the time that it was born. That's why the shechita does nothing. But the treifa, it developed the treifa later on. So therefore, because it had a moment where it was royal achila, the shechita is able to do something. It's not comparable to a chazer, because the chazer was also from the time that it was born, but a treifa only developed later. Here's the problem. Not every treifa developed later. You could have a baby animal that was born as a treifa. It was born with a hole in the heart. Says the Gemara, Tolei Mashevesa, like the Mishnah. Harishanol treifa min habetem minayin. It's not a good taina because there are treifas that are born that way. So says the Gemara, you're right. The answer is very simple. You want to know what's the difference between treifa and chazer? That by chazer the shechita does nothing, but by treifa the shechita removes tumah. I'll tell you the reason. The reason is because by a chazer it's not a min of an animal you could eat. By a treifa it's a cow, so you can't eat this treifa. But a cow's bichlal, it's in the category of an animal that's roy lachila. Eloi. At least by a treifa, it has its min, it's shaykh to have shchita in that category. It says the Mishnah ends off, there is one type of kosher animal that the shchita taka does nothing because it has the status of like a chazer. It's not even in the category of a cow, and that's if a cow was born after 8 months. If it's born after 8 months, it had no possibility of surviving. It's called a nafel. Mitzias nowadays, I'm not sure, but the Mishnah understands that an 8-month cow is not considered like a cow at all. It's considered like a rock. It's mamish like no shaykhs. And therefore, if you have an 8-month cow that you shecht, the tumah is not removed because it's like chazer. Ben shmoyne chai ein shchita samateres lefi she'ein b'mina shchita. Okay. Now, you had a machlekes tanoim. So you have the hand of the animal that's sticking out, and then you shecht it. So the hand is so the question is, what's the status of the hand regarding tumah for the rest of the body? So Rav Meir shita is that it's an avela, and then it transmits tumah to the rest of the body of the fetus. The Chum say no, it's not an avela. It has a much lesser status of tumah because the shechita removes the tumas nevela. It just has the status of tumas treifa, which is just relevant to kachim. Now the question is like this: you have this hand that, according to Rav Meir, is tameh, right? How does it automatically transmit tumah to the rest of the body? So think of it, let's go with like, the hand is sticking out until the elbow. So that entire hand and elbow are outside in their tameh. According to Rav Meir, it automatically transmits tumah to the rest of the body. How? So you'll say, well, they're connected. They're connected internally, right? It's not the skin that's tameh, it's the limbs inside. The problem is there's a rule. It's called tumas beis hastarim, which is that if you have a tumah where the two items that are touching in a non-revealed way. They're touching beneath the surface. The area of contact is beneath the surface. The halacha is, it seems to be a machlekes tanayim whether that can transmit tumah. So the Gemara says, l'chora, our Mishnah is related to that shayla. Why? Our Mishnah is saying that the hand is tameh, and then it automatically transmits tumah to the rest of the fetus. According to Meir, in the status of nevela, according to the Rabbanon, a status of much lever, tumas treifa that's relevant to kachin. Even though the contact is happening beneath the skin, it's happening inside. It's that the elbow is connected to the arm, or the ankle is connected to the femur, whatever the anatomy is. That's happening beneath the surface, and you're acknowledging that that could be a transmission of tumah. But that's called tumas beis hastarim, which, as we're going to see in a moment, is a machlekes tanoim seemingly. So says the Gemara, Amai, why do we say that the rest of the fetus is tameh from the hand that's sticking out? Tumas beis hastarim he. This is a contact of tumah in a concealed area. An example is over here, like where the tumah is happening beneath the surface with limbs, right? Or, I was thinking the skin, but I guess we're looking at it the inside, I'm not sure. Or another example would be if you have a towel, that part of the towel is tameh, and it touches the rest of the towel, the area of contact is happening inside the towel as well. Another example. And the problem is, tumas beis hastarim is not so pashut. It's machlekes tanoim. Lema Rav Meir l'tamei. It must be Rav Meir's l'shitasai, because as we're going to see in a moment, Rav Meir taka holds tumas beis hastarim is able to transmit tumah. Where is this Rav Meir? The Tanan, the Mishnah says. Now, in order to just a quick hakdama, there's a zav. Let's go a nida. A nida is able to transmit tumah by contact. That's tumas nida. Maga nida, which is that it's a smaller level of tumah. If she touches any a piece of cloth that's 3 fingers by 3 fingers, even a little bit, she's able to transmit tumah by contact. But there's a different type of tumah, which is called midras, which she doesn't even have to touch, but just putting her weight on it. If she sits on it, then she's obviously touching, or even if she's sitting on a pillow on top of the couch is supporting her weight. That's called tumas midras. The halacha is, it's a very high level tumah, but in order to be makabel midras, you have to have a squash of cloth, a piece of cloth that's 3 tfachim by 3 tfachim. So says the Mishnah, shloish al shloisha, you have a garment that's 3 tfachim by 3 tfachim. That a nida sat on, so it's midras, and nechlak, and then you cut it in half. So now it's no longer 3 by 3 tfachim, so it's no longer tamei midras. Tahar min midras, avol tamei maga midras. But it's still tamei maga midras. Now, why is it tamei maga midras? Now, l'chor, we're talking about a situation where even if the nida didn't actually touch the garment, she sat on a pillow and under the pillow was this garment. So originally it's midras, but then it was cut in half. So l'chor, all tumah should be removed. Says Rameir, no, it's still maga midras. Now, why is it maga midras? Because when it was midras, the garment touched each other. This garment that's remaining, these 2 pieces, let's say it was 3 tfachim originally, and now you cut in half, so it's 1.5 by 1.5. Each 1.5 piece touched the other side originally. So originally was midras, and all the garment touches each other, similar to the hand of the fetus that the entire body is connecting. So there's a transmission of tumah inside the garment, from one part of the garment touching the other part of the garment, and that's tumas beis hastarim. And says our Meir, it does transmit tumah. So even if the nida never actually touched the garment, but because it had midras, and that means part of the garment was midras, and it touches the rest of the garments, the entire garment is transmitting tumah inside the garment itself. Rav Yossi seems to disagree, and he says, no, that's tumas beis hastarim. That's not a legitimate transmission of tumah. When did the midras touch the garment? Ella im naga b'zav she'tamei magazav. Rav Yossi says, that's tumas beis hastarim. That's a transmission of tumah within the garment itself. That's not legitimate. If when the nida sat on the garment, she touched the garment, so then the garment originally was both maga and midras. So fine. So then if it's cut in half, it remains maga. But if it was just midras, we don't say that the garment that's cut in half, it transmitted, because it originally touched the larger part of the garment. We don't say that because it's tumas beis hastarim. So it seems to be a machlekes or Meir and Rav Yossi, whether tumas beis hastarim is a legitimate form of tumah. Our Mishnah, which says that the entire animal is transmitting tumah from one hand to the rest of the body, l'chor is totally in this machlokes. So the Gemara says no. Lav itmar la wasn't it clarified? Amar Ula said lo yishanu ela shloisha shloisha shenechlak. Aval shalosh shalosh habois mibeged gadol b'shas prishasam mavian mekabos tumah mavian. Hanami b'shas prishasam me'ever mekabel tumah me'ever. So Ula explains like this: the whole machlokes is magamidras, is tummy beis astarim. That's when you have a garment that's 3x3. So let's say it's originally 3x3 tvachim. You cut it in half, and now it's no longer 3x3. So that's when there's a machlokes of, do you say that the tumah is entirely gone, or do you say that this part originally touched a larger beged? Tummy beis astarim. But let's say you have a large beged, 10x10. And you cut off a little, 3-finger length piece off of it. Says Ula, everyone agrees it's Tameh. Why? It's not Tumas Beis Astarim. Tumas Beis Astarim means that the transmission of Tumah is happening inside. Over here it's very simple. When you cut that little piece off of the larger beged, the larger beged is still Tameh Medras because it's more than 3x3 Tvachim. When you cut off this little piece of cloth, it's inevitable that it's going to touch the larger part when you're cutting it. It's just the mitzias. When you're cutting it, there's going to be some area of contact as you're cutting it and when you're finished cutting it. So the tumah is not a beis astarim. It's a practical tumah. They're touching each other. So too over here, the tumah is not really from the hand automatically going inside the limb, but rather when you cut off the limb, right, you're cutting it, as you're cutting it, it's impossible that there's no area of contact. So it has nothing to do with Tumah Beis Astarim. The Tumah is just coming from the contact of as it's being cut. That's Ula's take. Ravina says slightly different. He says, no. Ravina says, I'll tell you why this is different. Normally Tumah Beis Astarim is Taka Machlokes Tanoim. But over here it's different. Over here by the Uber, because you're going to cut off the limb, right? That limb is sticking out. You can't eat the limb, so you have to cut it off. Because you're going to cut it off, it's as if it's already cut. So normally, when it's one item, we don't say that there's a transmission of tumah inside. But by the hand, the reason why we do, see, by the beged, we don't say the average beged is meant to be cut. So therefore, the transmission of tumah is happening inside. It's not outside. Therefore, it's a machlokes tanaim. But over here, the hand that's sticking out, you're going to cut that hand off anyway. So it's as if it's removed. And it's not... Therefore, the transition of tumah is not happening inside the limb. It's as if it's two separate limbs that are touching each other. Because anything that is meant to be cut, it's as if it's already cut. Now, says the Gemara, who is the author of saying that something that's meant to be cut is already cut? Kaman Rav Meir. It seems also to be only Rav Meir Titanan. Let's say you have a handle of a utensil, it's very long, and you're going to cut it in half. The halot is asl. It's not matbal hamakam. You don't have to tovel in a mikvah the entire time. You only have to tovel what you're going to leave, because the part that's going to be cut, it's as if it's already cut. Divra Meir. The Chum say no. Achiyat was kul. The Chum disagree. So this concept that you're telling me that because the hand is going to be cut, it's as if it's already cut, and therefore the transmission of tumah is because it's like two separate limbs that are touching each other. That's also not universally accepted, because that seems to be the shita of Meir that says that when it comes to the handle of a kli, that because you're going to cut it, it's as if it's already cut. But the Chum disagree. They say no. A handle of a kli, it's not as if it's already cut. You have to cut it. So they would maybe argue differently. They would not say that the hand of a limb is already as if it's already cut. So the Gemara says no. Afil tim rabbanon chaburi oichlin command mefarsi dami unagiyah dadi. The rabbanon agree, even though they say by a kli that something you plan on cutting is not as if it's already cut, because by kalim it's very hard. Cutting plastic is an avodah. That's a very laborious thing to do. So therefore, they don't look as if it's already done. But when it comes to the hand of a limb of an animal, which is very easy to cut, it's as if it's already cut. L'kuli alma. Just to finish up, so you have two different approaches as to how to explain the Mishnah. The tumah transmission, according to Ula, it's happening because as you're cutting it, they're going to automatically touch. Ravina says it's because the limb is going to be cut, it's as if it's already cut, and therefore it's as if they're touching each other. So Bishleim Ula Hainutani Chatcha, El Ravina Mai Chatcha. According to Ula, that the whole pshat is that the tumah is happening as you're cutting it. I get the Mishnah says Chatcha, it says that you're cutting it because that's when the tumah is taking place. But according to Ravina, that the tumah is not taking place as you're cutting. It's just anything that's meant to be cut, it's as if it's already cut. So why does the Mishnah have to say that you cut the hand at all? Even if you didn't cut the hand, you left the hand outside during the shechita, it would be the same halacha. Because according to Ula, it's taka during the cutting where the transmission of tumah takes place, so it has to be mentioning chatcha. According to Ravina, it's kolai melachta kechatach dami. Merely knowing that you're going to cut is as if it's already cut. So then why do you have to say why does the Mishnah's case have to be we cut the hand? Even if you didn't cut the hand, it's kolai melachta kechatach dami. So the Gemara ends off, you're right. It only said chatcha because the seif of the Mishnah, but for the reish of the Mishnah, it did not have to say chatcha at all.